Welcome back, and you're still with Nile Cruise on Nile TV. Well, just as life rose from the waters, the seeds of civilization were first sown along the banks of the Nile. This mighty river, which flows north from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean Sea, nourished the growth of the pharaonic kingdom. The ancient Egyptian civilization has captured the imagination of many people in different times and from different philosophical viewpoints, and some fairly incredible claims that have been made regarding their origins and the extent of their knowledge. Well, joining us today to see all of this and to talk more about ancient Egypt is Dr. Nabil Tawfiq. Welcome, Dr. Nabil. Thank you so much for joining us, a professor of civilization and history.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with the first question. And in your opinion, what are some of the mysteries of the ancient Egyptian that still remain a secret to us in spite of the modern technology and despite the various discoveries that Egypt has witnessed the past period?
Okay, just before we begin, let me just correct a little something. I'm a travel guide, a lecturer, and I'm a researcher in Egyptology.
Okay.
And I've been studying and researching for this subject for over 43 years.
Wow.
Regarding your question, there are so many aspects, countless aspects, about the ingenuity of the ancient Egyptians. What the ancient Egyptians have reached, we still haven't, in so many aspects of knowledge and science. Now let me give you an example. Maybe the best when we refer to engineering and construction, the Great Pyramid. If we could put the first picture, which shows the design of the inside of the Great Pyramid, it's pretty well known that it's the only wonder of the 7 wonders of the world which is still standing in position, and every other wonder is largely gone. Almost 480 feet high, a base which covers over 12 acres, 2,300,000 separate blocks, mount to the weight of 6 million tons. This is still one of the great mysteries.
Until this moment.
Up to this
despite
minute,
all of the discoveries that happened
around
around
all
it.
of the discoveries, in spite of the great advance in engineering, in architecture, best known architects worldwide just agreed on one fact: the only architectural challenge is the Great Pyramid. Not only the way it's been constructed, not only the way the interior design is being planned, but you see inside the King's Burial Chamber, if you look at the ceiling of the King's Burial Chamber, there are enormous blocks of granite. Every one mounts to the weight of 20 tons. How could on earth raise blocks weighing or exceeding the weight of 20 tons up to a height of 70 meters without using cranes, without using any of the modern techniques, machineries, name it? There is no way it can be done today. And let me tell you a story. During the late 70s, Japan tried to build a miniature version of the Great Pyramid, built on a scale of 1 to 20. In other words, that would mount to the height of 7 meters. The Great Pyramid is 140 meters, or it exceeds that a little bit, 142 meters. So they designed a mimicked rather, the Great Pyramid. 7 meters tall. They used machinery, of course, to cut the blocks, used laser beams to cut through the blocks, just to mimic the design of the interior plan. If we could show on the monitor picture number 1, which shows the design of the Great Pyramid, so our viewers would know.
It's coming. It's going to be on in a second.
In any case, the Japanese.
It's actually being shown at the moment right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. They wanted to build a miniature version of the Great Pyramid, 7 meters tall or high, and used
I'm sorry, Doctor, where was that, Mr. That
during
was
the late
in
70s.
Japan? You were saying the mimic was done?
Or in Egypt.
In Egypt,
yes.
Here. Okay.
Probably about 4 or 5 miles from the
okay.
Great Pyramid at Giza. And they did it, and it stood 7 meters tall. Few weeks later, it simply crumbled to
collapsed?
ground.
Oh, wow.
The whole thing collapsed.
Because I was going to ask you, where is it? It's not there anymore.
Naturally, after such an incident took place, they had to remove all of the blocks, and they
Yeah.
went back home, just emphasizing on the ingenuity of the ancient Egyptian architect
Well,
and
exactly.
designer. And
That's
this is
why
telling
it's a wonder.
It
I mean,
is.
because
It is
it's
a
kind of
wonder.
impossible to actually do it. That's why it's one of the really
That's true. That is
amazing
true.
wonders of
And
the
this
world.
is why the great architects of today said that the Great Pyramid will ever remain the only architectural challenge until its time God inherits the earth and what's on it.
Well, Dr. Nabil, I know you're calling for the reconsideration of a lot of widely known concepts. Is that right, about the ancient Egyptian
Exactly right.
civilization? Okay, if you can tell us, maybe give us a couple or two examples of those concepts that you're actually calling for the reconsideration,
Okay.
and what's the reason behind them, why you want to reconsider them?
See, ever since we started studying or teaching the subject or the science of Egyptology worldwide, one of the worst mistakes, there are so many inequities, let's say, which must be rectified. And the worst inequity, in my personal opinion, is why it's being conveyed to us that the ancient Egyptian civilization and the ancient Egyptian religion was a polytheistic religion,
Yep.
was not based on the worship of one God, the Almighty. And that is absolutely wrong. I have gone through a lot of ancient Egyptian religious texts which talk about God being the one and alone. And in ancient Egyptian, in hieroglyphs, it sounds Wa, Wa, which means the one and alone. The ancient Egyptian texts refer to God being the creator of mankind and all beings. What is up in the skies? What is on earth? What is deep in the bottom of the seas? God is the all-seeing. God is wisdom. God is grace. God is omniscient. So in other words, the ancient Egyptians referred to what we refer to today as the 99 names or aspects and characteristics of the one God. And there is a reality, there's a dry fact that Egypt is a sacred land. This land, Misr, we're talking about, or Egypt, is been a foothold to many of the holy messengers of God, as of Prophet Sayyidina Idris, Prophet Sayyidina Ibrahim or Abraham, Prophet Sayyidina Jacob, Prophet Sayyidina Joseph or Yusuf, Prophet Sayyidina Moses and Aaron. Prophet Jesus came to Egypt. So this sacred ground was the foothold for all these messengers of God. And there's a reality. As long as God is resurrected a prophet or sent a prophet to convey a message to a group of people on a certain part of this world or earth, then that message must have been conveyed. And these people who have received the message of God must have believed in their prophets. And this is the real secret behind the ancient Egyptian civilization. This is the secret of the ancient Egyptian civilization. It simply goes back, or is due to rather, the presence of distinguished prophets in Egypt and the belief of the ancient Egyptians in all prophets of God and the unity of God.
So there are a lot of concepts about the ancient Egyptian religions, speaking about, the sacred land, which is largely regarded as the polytheistic. How do you see this, and how far is it true?
Okay. As I mentioned, the concept is wrong. It's 100% mistaken. And this is simply perversion. And the reason would go back to the early time of the Greeks. As you know, Alexander invaded Egypt back in 332 before Christ. Shortly after he paid a visit to Memphis, he continued on to consult the famous oracle, known as the Oracle of Amen Zeus, over the oasis of Siwa. There inside, He went into the sanctuary, or the Holy of Holies, and he asked many questions. Maybe for now the most two important questions. First was, shall I have dominion over the earth, all over the earth? And the answer he received was yes. Second question was, have I punished all the murderers of my father Philip II? And the answer he received was, no mortal man can kill thy father, because thy father is Amen. Behind the sanctuary screen, there was an ancient Egyptian priest, according to the story, hiding himself behind and answering all these questions to Alexander. And from that answer, specifically that one, no mortal man can kill thy father, because thy father is Amen, he could just get the idea. The ancient Egyptian priest was trying to convince Alexander that he's the son of an Egyptian god. Confirming this, shortly afterwards, Alexander it's well known that he sent a letter to his mother Olympus, addressing himself Alexander, the son of Amenzus. 9 years later, when he died of fever in Babylon, in 323 before Christ, Egypt was divided, and one of his army generals, the empire actually, the empire was divided amongst his army generals, and Ptolemy I took over Egypt. He became the king of Egypt, and the first of a series of kings, mounting to 13 of them. Everyone is called a Ptolemy. He was an intelligent person, and he realized that religion, from the very beginning of history, was an important issue. So one thing he tried to do is to equate between the Egyptian divine aspects, names and characteristics of the one God.
Dr. Nabil, we're actually showing the pictures at the moment on air, so if you'd like to comment on them.
Okay,
they're actually
which picture are we showing? I'm sorry, I don't see it in the monitor.
I won't be able to tell either because I can't see it too, but maybe if you want to have like you can go on and sort of a general overview, or keep going as you like.
The reason which led to this misconception and this perversion is that they tried to equate between the divine aspects, names and characteristics of the one God the ancient Egyptians believed from the beginning of time, and the Greek gods and goddesses back at the time. It's well known that Greece back at the time had polytheism. They worshipped many gods and goddesses. So rather than describing, say, Horus or Ra, the sun, as a symbol of illumination, as a basic and the main source of life, they refer to Ra as the Greek Apollo or Apollino, the Greek sun god. They described Isis and Hathor, or rather equated between Isis and Hathor and Aphrodite or Aphrodite. Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine, became equated to the Egyptian Imhotep, and that was the beginning of that terrible mistake. We went on the footsteps of everything which was conveyed to us, first written by the early Greeks, and then all of those who just went on their footsteps. While the reality is that the ancient Egyptian religion was a monotheistic religion.
Yeah. Well, Doctor, let me move on to a totally, another aspect. What is the real meaning of the word Pharaoh?
Thank you for asking that question. Pharaoh, as a word in Arabic, refers to every tyrant. When we read about the Quran, and we read about the story of Prophet Moses in the Quran, and we see how the Quran describes that king during the time of Prophet Moses, who was being referred to as a pharaoh. He killed women, enslaved children, told them that he knows not any deity but himself. So this is actually what it means, the word Pharaoh or Pharaoh in Arabic. It's said that the word is being derived from an ancient Egyptian number of words. The word Pharaoh comes from Per'a. Per in ancient Egyptian means a house or a palace, and A means great. So Per'a means the great palace or the great house, as a reference to he who dwells in that great place. Per'a was derived to become Pharaoh. Pharaoh became the origin of Pharaoh in Arabic and Pharaoh in English, which means a tyrant. And that can never be said
It means
regarding...
to be the large house.
Yes, it originally meant the larger, the great house. But when we talk
So
about
this means Egypt, or is it, what does it mean? The
Egypt?
Which house?
the house of the king.
Okay.
So he who lives in that great place is a reference to the king of ancient Egypt.
Okay.
But we shouldn't describe or address all kings of ancient Egypt as pharaohs, since that word we know by now that it's a terrible word and it means a tyrant. During the time of Prophet Joseph in Egypt, and when we read the verses of the Quran, we see that the Quran verses refer to the king of Egypt addressing him Al-Malik, Qal Al-Malik. The king said, when they are addressing, or the verses are addressing the prime minister of ancient Egypt, they refer to him as Al-Aziz. So they didn't refer to the king back at the time, during the time of Prophet Joseph, as a pharaoh, didn't refer to the prime minister by today's standard as a pharaoh by the word Al-Aziz. So we shouldn't actually address all kings of ancient Egypt and consider them as tyrants or pharaohs.
Yes, all right. Finally, Dr. Nabil Tawfiq, Professor of Civilization and History and also researcher and a lecturer and also a tour guide. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Today.
Thank you very much.
Let's now move to the upcoming segment with Abir Mutwalli and the
Tourism
touristic
as
magazine.
well, related to our segment and a lot
Exactly.
of ancient discoveries. So let's go and have a look.
Egypt welcomed back home up to 123 ancient Egyptian